as we celebrate Disability Pride Month, I'm excited to also talk about an important theme: allyship. I think often we mistakenly think about how, unless you're a person with disabilities or know somebody directly with disabilities or experience in one way or another, that, you might not have a way to contribute, even if you want to. And today's guest is here to change your mind. Even for me, I've had a lot of learning in the past few years, working on more disability innovation projects and disability tech. And working on these intersections has been truly inspiring, and to be reminded that there's just so much more work to be done. With today's guest, Sandy Lacey is about to blow your mind in a very good way. You see, she is the perfect innovation leader who is intersecting innovation, disability, and tech with entrepreneurial mindset and empowering other entrepreneurs to rethink how they bring out their best. You see, while she is today the executive director of the Howie Innovation Center Perkins School for the Blind, before that, she was in a different space: climate change and renewable clean energy. In fact, she had 20 plus years of operation leading in startup, government, and corporate settings, recruiting, hiring, and developing 50 plus employees, and helping out concepts and delivering 30 plus innovative proofs, empowering students for innovation entrepreneurship courses at the Tufts University and MIT Sloan School for more than 200 plus students, and have vetted for investment or strategic partnership for more than 300 plus startups, and has also played a key role as a co-founder in several startups, helping it grow from scratch. And throughout all these chapters, what she quickly realized is that she loved building communities, ecosystems, and really seeing innovation come to its fruition. And so when it came to her last role, where she was scratching her head and wondering, geez, is there something else perhaps I could do beyond just this corporate and renewable energy? Somebody knocked on her door and raised, what about helping those who really might need your help? People with disabilities. Her first heart-to-heart conversations with the Perkins School for the Blind required some courage. She admitted, I'm new to this field. I might have experience in innovation and ecosystem, but I'm going to be new to learning about people with disabilities and the disability tech. Is that okay? They were okay indeed, because they said, hey, we have that expertise. Don't worry. But what we need is your expertise: innovation, ecosystem building, and allyship. And together with that conversation, 2 years has passed by where she has not only led innovation and community building, but also mapped out a gap in the ecosystem. You see, there's a lot of disability tech, aka technology and innovation, that has been built for people with disabilities to improve accessibility. And she quickly realized there's no proper definition for that, or a place where you can see a report of where are all the different types of technologies or innovations out there that's helping people with disabilities. So she went on a journey of finding, researching, which led to identifying more than 14,000 companies working on such an innovative mission, and much more. I also came across Sandy's work because she was talking about the findings that she found from this research and why she's doing what she does, which inspired me so much to want to reach out to her, and I'm so happy she said yes. So with further ado, let's go meet Sandy in Boston and what she's working on. So very excited to have Sandy here. Welcome to the show. Wow. I mean, the past few months, we've been really inspired to dive into all these different stories. But Sandy, I couldn't wait to get to this particular month because I think there's just so much unpacking we have to do. Disability Pride Month, as we dive into better educating ourselves about disability, how we can be a better advocate, ally, and you're kind of in that unique intersection, and on top of that, entrepreneurship as well. I guess I'm curious, Sandy, for you, maybe humble us with some stats and numbers. What do we not know that we need to know about, how big this space is and how important this is? How many people are with disability, how many fall into that category, what are the different categories, and maybe perhaps the different types of businesses that exist? Because I know you study these and often want to make sure others are aware of them.
Sure. Well, Monica, thank you so much for having me on your show. My name is Sandy Lacey. I'm the executive director of the How Innovation Center at the Perkins School for the Blind. And the disability tech sector is really really incredibly robust. It's 2024 and we're seeing a ton of activity in the space. I will take a little bit of a step back and kind of actually just talk about the population of people with disabilities in general. When you think about it, we all know someone who has a disability or we ourselves have one, whether we identify as having a disability or not. 16% of the global population has a disability. That number is actually underreported. In the US, it's around 25% of our population has a disability. It's the largest minority group in the world, people with a disability. It's the world's most diverse minority group. And it's the minority group that anybody can join at any moment in their lives. And if we're all lucky enough to grow into old age, we're probably going to join the community as well. I think, in the US, historically, disability has really been other. But when we think about it in that context, it's really everywhere and all of us.
Oh, and try not to hit the table because I'm hearing a little echo.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me
was good.
move. Okay, and I'll give you a few more numbers too.
Please go ahead. Pause first, just so that we can edit that.
In addition, people with disabilities and their allies control around $13 trillion worth of annual disposable income. So there's a significant amount of money on the table. So it's not just a large population. This group of individuals also controls a significant amount of capital, and they get to choose where they spend their money every year. We also, let me think about some, we're going to edit. Is this your edit sign? Okay. At the How Innovation Center at Perkins School for the Blind, we've identified over 1,400 companies building products and services specifically for people with disabilities. These companies collectively are valued. Last year, the market was a $25 billion sector. In 2022, it's a legitimate sector, disability tech, which is basically all products and services for people with and without disabilities that increases accessibility. So it's basically the combination of assistive technology and inclusive technology.
That's incredible. No, thank you so much for bringing that to the picture so that way we can put that into perspective. But of course, we're here because we want to learn more about you in this whole world and how your leadership and role plays. So Sandy, bring us back to maybe the very, very beginning. Young Sandy, where were you? Where did you grow up? And what was kind of your perception of who you wanted to be and what you wanted to do when you grow up, when you were young?
Yeah. So I grew up in South Florida and then New York State. So I spent the first 5 years of my life in Florida, and then we relocated to New York for my father's job. About a year after we moved to New York, so it was my mother, my father, my older sister, and I, my father was diagnosed with esophageal cancer at the age of 37. And he passed away a year later when he was 38 years old. And he was a trauma surgeon. So my dad had spent his entire career building his life to help literally save the lives of others. And, he didn't really get a chance to live his life.
So
38
sorry.
is so young.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I really grew up in the shadow. I always say I grew up in his shadow because he left. He passed away and I was only 7. And so at a very early age, I learned a few really fundamental things. One, you got to live your life every day. Got to live your life to the fullest because nothing's guaranteed. And 2, if we're given this gift of life, you should try to do something that matters. And those were the 2 kind of guiding principles that I think have stuck with me from my early childhood that I've embraced throughout the rest of my life, both personally and professionally.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that must not have been easy. And as you have continued on your journey, as you said in New York, uh, in your studies, I'm curious if you had some insight into, geez, like this is maybe a career or job I would want in the future. What was it then? And what did you end up pursuing as a result?
Yes. No, I did not have some deep internal beating drum at the age of 10 that said, you're going to be an innovation executive when you grow up. Absolutely not. I thought I was going to be either a professional horseback rider or an actress. I always just followed what was interesting to me. I'm insatiably curious. I like to do really deep dives into topics. And I continued that thread throughout my career, and I just had confidence that if I positioned myself near people who I could learn from, and I made myself a valuable contributor to a team, that doors would open. So I went to Georgetown University undergrad. I did not major in business. I did not major in government. I did not major in medicine or any sort of like immediately useful skill. I was an American Studies major, which is basically the intersection of U.S. society, politics, and history. And it was really fascinating. I was a Spanish minor. I did my study abroad in Spain. But I was just really interested in pop culture. And American Studies was the major where I could dive deep into that specific subject matter. So that's what I did. And then when it came time to graduate, I had a friend say, well, where are you going to work next? And I said, well, where are you working? And he was like, Morgan Stanley or something like that. And, a lot of my friends from college ended up going into financial services. And I said, I don't want to do that. But I've always been interested in environmental issues. Maybe if I want to be an environmental and go into that space, maybe I should work at a law firm and see if I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. So I worked at a law firm for 2 years as a litigation legal assistant and quickly learned I did not want to be a lawyer and saved myself over $150,000 worth of student loan debt.
There we go.
Yeah, but I learned a ton working at the law firm. I learned from my lawyers about the importance of putting thought into your career and into your job, the importance of who you're working for. So which partner a law firm's made up of partners. Depending on which partners you're working for, it can really make or break your day-to-day job. So I learned really quickly the importance of team and how if you can have a say in who your team is, and if you can kind of interview your team to see if you're going to learn something from them, you're going to set yourself up for a more enjoyable, successful work experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for a few years. And the advice I got from the lawyers was, hey, if you're interested in climate, clean energy, environmental stuff, just go work in that sector. You don't have to be a lawyer to do it. And so I went and I worked at an environmental nonprofit for a year and learned a lot about selling because I was on the business development team essentially for this nonprofit. So creating partnerships around climate change advocacy. But I was really jealous of our legislative advocates who were actually writing the bills and on the in Sacramento, because this was out in California at the time, in Sacramento, working on kind of like advancing the policy behind climate and clean energy issues. So I decided to get my master's degree in energy policy and business. And that's what actually led me to Boston and started my 20-year career in Boston.
Wow. I love that intersection and reminders that it doesn't have to be like magically all clear from the beginning. You just follow one trail at a time and find that journey and purpose and value into it. In that mix of all of this with climate and business, you've also started a lot of different initiatives and you've continued to build on your career. And there was a certain point where you've kind of, I guess, made that shift into this world of disability tech. Tell me when that happened, why, and bring us there.
So after I moved to Boston and did my master's degree at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, I ended up at 3 different startups. 2 of them were in the climate space, one was not, but I learned a ton from my very early stage entrepreneurial endeavors. I spent a handful of years working in the state government under Governor Deval Patrick, helping build a climate tech ecosystem around climate innovation. So, how can you bring together a variety of key stakeholders to help accelerate innovation within a specific sector? But I had over $100,000 worth of student loan debt. And so, and I'm just going to, being very candid, I had to, the startups did not pan out from an equity perspective. And so I ended up having an excellent opportunity to help grow a corporate innovation lab at a large financial services company. So for 6 years, I built and led an innovation lab internally at a large life insurance company. And that experience gave me a ton of exposure to people leadership, C-suite advocacy, and also just depth of expertise in advanced technologies. But I missed that ecosystem collaboration component that I had experienced in Governor Patrick's administration. And I also really missed the social impact component that I felt when I was in the climate sector. So after 6 years running this corporate innovation lab, I saw an opportunity pop up to build and lead an innovation center at the Perkins School for the Blind. And it totally married my love for bringing stakeholders together around innovation and an impact-driven mission. So I met our CEO and founder, Dave Power, and was immediately inspired. And again, applied that lens. Am I going to learn from this person? Is this going to be a great team to work with? I met with the leadership team at Perkins, and I said, please give me the job.
Well, I'm glad you did, and you have continued to pave ways not only to bring that innovation and entrepreneurship mindset into that unique space, but also being the bridge for others to better understand how can we be a better ally, what is going on even in that space, and what have we needed to debunk. And you've already started in our conversation to highlight some information on that. It's been about 2+ years that you've been there. I'm curious because I guess unless you're in this space advocating or working in for people with disabilities, I feel like there's so many things that we just are not aware or educated enough properly. Maybe start us from the beginning on that. What does Perkins School for the Blind even do in general? And why is your work as the Director of Innovation important in when you came in?
Sure. So when I joined Perkins, I remember talking to our CEO, Dave Power, and I was very candid. I said, I have no depth of expertise in disability or accessibility. And he said, that's not a problem, because guess what? We do. We have almost 200 years of experience in that. What we don't have experience in is ecosystem development and innovation ecosystem development. So together, we're going to be unstoppable. And I was like, all right, I like that. I like that attitude. I liked that open-mindedness. I also really deeply thought about it, and any social movement regarding inclusion would not be where it is without allies. So you don't have to have the lived experience of being a specific race, a specific gender, having a disability or not, to be an ally of another community, right? So I quickly learned, listening to my colleagues and peers and people who I've met along the way who have a disability, about their individual lived experience, how unique each of their lived experiences are, and how I can act as an ally in a variety of different ways in my life. So Perkins, just to take a step back, Perkins School for the Blind is the country's first school for children with visual impairment in the United States.
Wow.
We're actually almost 200 years old. We're turning 200 in 2029, which is so impressive. Yes. I think there's only one Fortune 500 company that's as old as us.
Wow.
So to be around for that long, you've had to have been innovating along the way. We were started by a gentleman named Samuel Gridley Howe. That's actually who the Innovation Center is named after, because we're the Howe Innovation Center. He was our founding director, and he was an entrepreneur and an innovator. So he found the first students, he found the first teachers, he got the initial capital funding to build the school, and he really brought the school from, 0 to 1. He also was an innovator. He invented a precursor to Braille called Boston Line Type. He was a pioneer in deaf blindness education and teaching methodologies. So he actually provided the first formal education to a deaf-blind woman named Laura Bridgman. He was an abolitionist in Boston, and as a feminist, I would be remiss if I didn't, mention his wife, Julia Howe, who was the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The two of them, if you're going to name an innovation center, not a bad namesake,
Wow.
is what I would say.
Wow, but what a power couple.
Seriously, yeah. And at Perkins, we work to help every child with a disability find their place in the world. There are 240 million children globally who have a disability. Through our education programs, we work very, very hard to make sure our kids are prepared for the world. And through the Howe Innovation Center, we're really focusing on preparing the world for our kids.
I love that. How big is the school right now? Like how many students and what's the age range that they would be going?
Yeah, so we have a physical location in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. It's a beautiful, gorgeous campus with around 200 students with multiple disabilities. So most of our students have a visual impairment, but over 50% of them have a second disability. So we really work in a multi-disability world here at Perkins. We serve around 1,400 kids in the public schools in Massachusetts. So we really believe in an inclusive education model. 95% of kids with a visual impairment in Massachusetts are in the public schools. So we have teachers of the visually impaired who go out into the public schools and make sure our kids have what they need to be successful. We've touched over 100 countries around the globe, and we're deep in about I would say 12 countries right now. We don't build schools, we build capacity. So we work with policymakers, parents, and children to make sure every kid gets the right to an education.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for what you and your team do to make inclusive education workplace all possible. And speaking of which, I think it's good to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that terminology, right? Inclusive education, inclusive technology. What does that really mean for you, and why is that important?
Yeah. Well, okay, let me take a step and think about this a little bit, because it's a great question. It's a big question. I'm going to talk about disability tech, and I'll break down the definition. So at the Howe Innovation Center, we're very focused on catalyzing and convening an ecosystem around disability tech. When you think about what is disability tech, it's a term that when I joined Perkins 2 years ago, I saw a lot of folks using, but I actually couldn't find a definition for it. So I met with a ton of different stakeholders and went on a big listening journey, meeting with investors, CEOs of large companies, entrepreneurs in the sector. And really what we workshopped together is that disability tech is all products and services that increase accessibility for people with and without disabilities. So I think when the average person hears the word disability tech, they probably think about assistive technologies, which are technologies that unlock access to a product or a service for a person with a disability. But there's this whole suite of companies out there that would never be categorized as an assistive technology company, but they would absolutely unlock accessibility for people with disabilities. And they usually fall into the category of inclusive tech. So the example I love to give is if there's a startup out there that uses AI to remove bias from the hiring process, that company, if they're successful, they might have been founded because they want to diversify the gender pipeline for software engineers, let's say. If that company is successful, though, and their product is successful, their AI solution is going to remove bias in the hiring process for people with disabilities as well. And so that's where we think about inclusive tech being a key player in the space of unlocking access for people with disabilities. Inclusive tech changes the way systems work. So like the system of education, the system of employment, whereas assistive tech is technology that makes access easier.
It's a really good reminder at how all those word choices make a difference in how we interact, how we see and understand those different products. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into the whole innovation center because even just the role of innovation, I think when somebody sees, so I'm the director of innovation, I have an innovation center. I think the question is like, okay, well, but what does that really mean? What do you actually do? Sandy, Can you break it down for us? I know you've been doing actually innovation work for quite some time, so would be curious if you can kind of allude to that a little bit more. Because to your point, our hope is that, this inspires maybe somebody else out there. It's like, wait, like we do have to have an innovation center and an innovation leader, but also with accessibility in mind. And maybe for those who are in those community, realize that, wait, we do need an innovation ally. So with that being context, break us down. What does innovation center even mean? And what would somebody like you who's leading innovation be actually doing?
Sure. It's a great question. I think there's this huge preconceived notion that folks who run innovation centers are up in a silo somewhere, whiteboarding and coming up with ideas on their own. And that is so not what my role is like. It's really about cross-stakeholder collaboration. So what happens in innovation is there's an innovation process, whether you're building a product for people with disabilities or not. It doesn't necessarily, every innovator kind of experiences the same pain points on their entrepreneurial journeys, whether it's finding their customers for primary market research and user testing. How do you find your customers? How do you interview them? Okay, you realize you need to hire someone to do something to build your product. Well, how do you hire? How do you fire? How do you pay people? If you're pre-revenue, how do you go raise venture capital to get your company off the ground? All entrepreneurs face similar challenges. There are friction points in the innovation process. And if there is an ecosystem supporting a sector, you can collaborate to try to remove some of those friction processes. So when you think about an innovation center, it's really about bringing together key stakeholders to accelerate the speed of innovation in a specific sector. For us, it's disability tech. The stakeholders who we're bringing together are people with disabilities because they are the ones who deeply and intimately understand challenges in their daily lives that innovators could solve. Every innovation should start with a problem statement, right? So this community is at the center of everything we do. Following that, we have startups and entrepreneurs, so people who are trying to build products and services to help remove some of these friction points. You have investors who are putting capital into these companies to help them accelerate, build, and grow. You have large corporations who care about disability inclusion and accessibility, who might be interested in the startups from an acquisition perspective or from a partnership perspective. They might be interested in the community of people with disabilities for primary market research for their own products that they're developing. So large corporates have an interest in seeing the sector accelerate. You have the government who cares about job creation, and they also care about accessibility, right? So you might have the world's leading biotech cluster, but if it's not accessible for folks with disabilities, how inclusive is that cluster, right? So you have the government, you have physical test beds. So these are large places that might be interested in deploying technologies within that sector. In the disability space, you can think of Fenway Park as an example. We're here in Boston. If you go see a baseball game, how can it be the most accessible baseball game ever? Is there audio captioning for folks who are visually impaired. How easy is it to buy food at the vendor kiosks, for example? All of these things could have accessibility enhancements. And, Fenway could just be like one example of a test bed that could participate in an ecosystem to help accelerate innovation within that space. And then finally, you have academia. So this is the future. These are the folks who are going to graduate and they're going to go into the workforce. They're going to start their own companies. And there's a lot of fascinating technology research that comes out of academia, but really it's about the future of our workforce. And these folks, are trained in the importance of privacy when building a company, the importance of security when building a company, but how much has accessibility been baked into it? That's something that we could really help accelerate. So as the head of the How Innovation Center, my job is to see all of the possible partnerships and programs that could be developed to help remove the friction points that all of these different stakeholders experience, whether it's finding the startup to partner with, or finding the VC to raise money from, or finding the startup to invest in, or finding the company to go work for as a student. All of these things, we can help make it easier by catalyzing and convening the ecosystem.
That's so helpful. And I appreciate you breaking that down, both from the big picture to the small details. And another question coming to mind as I'm listening is that, geez, how in the world do you keep track of all of that? Because that's so many different details, industry knowledge, experience that one would have to gain. I mean, Sandy, I know you've been doing innovation and now with disability tech for a while, but how do you indeed keep track of and continue your learning as a leader? What are your favorite ways to learn and make time for it? Because I don't know how you make time for all of this.
Yeah, it's an exercise in ruthless prioritization, I would say. Maybe not ruthless, but definitely an exercise in prioritization all day long. When I came on board, I met with our CEO, and he told me that there were a ton of startups that had been approaching Perkins over the years who were really interested in talking to our community of people with disabilities to help inform their product development. And he sent me examples of some of these companies, and they were fascinating. They were wearable glasses that used computer vision, technology coming basically out of like the autonomous vehicle space being applied to wearable technology for folks with visual impairments to help read the scene of a room rather than just navigate from point A to point B. There were so many devices like this. And I went to find a market research report about like the state of disability technologies. I couldn't find a single thing. I found reports that were like, here's the forecast for walkers, wheelchairs, and canes in the year 2040.
Crazy.
Yeah, like really like analog assistive tech market forecasting.
Yeah.
But there was you look up like the state of fintech, the state of climate tech, and there's hundreds of market research reports looking at this sector and what it means. This is 16% of the global population, 25% of the US population, and yet I couldn't find a single market intelligence report that talked about how quantifying how technology was impacting this sector and how Silicon Valley was thinking about injecting capital into the space. So I sat down and I made a database of around 1,400 companies that I could find that were building products and services for people with disabilities. And that exercise brought me more or less up to speed as to where the activity was taking place. For each company, I looked at where it was located, who had invested in it, if it was shipping a product or not, what community of people with disabilities was it trying to innovate for, what kind of innovation did it have? So was it innovating in the space of navigation or communication or self-care? And then before I knew it, we had a database where we could manipulate it to show us like in granularity, show me all the startups that are innovating in the space of Braille, using Braille literacy, using tactile surface innovation for people with visual impairments in the US. And it would pop out all of the relevant companies. And we've tried to make that database accessible through visualizations on our website. And we've also published a white paper report powered with insights from McKinsey and Company called Defining Disability Tech, the Rise of Inclusive Innovation, where we quantify the sector and publish this framework in hopes that folks align along the same taxonomy.
That's really powerful. We started the question with how are you making sure you balance, but you're sharing again as a reminder then and finding the things that you see as gap and that you're passionate about, because as you're problem solving and addressing it, you will find the time and be able to prioritize, as you have said, to know where you can bring value, which is so key. And speaking of which, one of the questions that I've loved asking all my guests in this show, this season in particular, is to continue to expand your learning of these different spaces and communities. We've asked our guests if you can empower us to know who are at least 3 people, I guess in the case for this month for you, as we celebrate Disability Pride Month, who are at least 3 people that you would recommend we learn from who happens to be working in the intersection of empowering people with disability. And it might be a tech person, it might be somebody who's working at school or something else, but like somebody who's an innovator and help making a difference for people with disability. If you had to shout out 3 names right now, who would it be that we should learn from?
Yes. So I'm gonna shout out 3 names, or the first 3 that came to mind. I'm gonna pull up one thing very quickly because I just want to make sure I get the title of her book right.
And I'll love if we can confirm the spelling later over email.
Yes. Okay. So the first person that came to mind is a woman named Sarah Hendren. She's the author of a book called What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World. And really just a fascinating look at the importance of inclusive design and thinking about people with disabilities in the design process. So I'm a Sarah fan, and I highly recommend that. It was one of the first books I read when I decided to take on this role. The second is a woman named Gina Klein, and she's the managing director of Enable Ventures, which is a venture fund that's focused on closing the disability wealth gap. And she's just taken a really powerful approach to injecting capital into this sector. And she's an incredible thought leader within the space. So I would definitely give Gina a shout out. And then the third person who I recommend people learn from is a gentleman named Jennison Asuncion, who's a head accessibility evangelist at LinkedIn. But he's also the co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And Jennison, has done a lot to raise the visibility of the importance of accessibility by co-founding GAD and by talking about the importance of accessibility. And he shows up, he's at places showing up, talking about this. And so I would say those are 3 folks who I would give a shout out to.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Sandy, I don't know how time flew by so fast. You've shared so many wisdom and insights. I feel like we only just got started, but I know folks can continue to reach out and learn from you. Thank you so much. I know you've also had a new role since April, so you've been very busy expanding on that. I heard, could you show the little fun thing you have next to you that I know you've said is a tangible reminder?
Yeah, so I have one of my favorite examples of innovation at Perkins right next to me. This is the Perkins Brailer.
Wow.
So if you can lean back a little bit.
Yes.
This is one of the leading ways that folks learn and produce Braille if you're visually impaired. Perkins invented it in 1951, and we are still manufacturing and distributing this across the globe with 400,000 users globally. Sometimes it's people's first point of contact with Perkins. And it's just a really, beautiful piece of our history and our current story of how we're helping folks, of how we're empowering folks to access employment and education.
I love it. 2 final questions as we wrap up, building on that. You share so many different wisdom. What is one single piece of advice you want to share with our innovators and listeners out there, no matter where they are in their journey?
Yeah. So my guiding principle that I employ all the time in my life is I try to make two versions of myself proud. It's the 8-year-old me and the 80-year-old me. So everything I do that's of significance, I think, would 8-year-old Sandy be proud of this choice? Your childhood, you're like excited, you have passions, you're creative, you're not yet jaded, you have faith that you can do it all. 8-year-old self. And then the 80-year-old self is much more realistic, but has principles and values developed over a lifetime of living. And so I always think about the 8-year-old version of me and the 80-year-old version of me, and if I'm making both of them proud.
That's so beautiful. I love it. Final question. What's the best way folks can stay in touch with you?
Yes. So I would say the best way to stay in touch with me is on LinkedIn, because that's where all of my business communication is.
Perfect. And I can attest because that's how I reached out to her. I saw her talk online, was really inspired and wanted to reach out to her to connect. And I was so happy she said yes to joining our show and sharing her story. Thank you so much, Sandy, for joining us. Folks, you know the drill. I always put our guest information in our blog. So please follow up with Sandy, say hello, and definitely check out the amazing work that she and her team does at the Perkins School for the Blind. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Monica.
Thank you. And folks, we'll be back again with another story next week.
Live each moment to the fullest. Sandy, thank you so much for reminding us that we all have a choice. And it's up to us how we make this life and moment meaningful and valuable to not only ourselves, but with others that we share with. Thank you for all that you do and reminding us as an ally what we can do even more. I know this will continue to inspire many others and remind them that we are all part of the narrative. Folks, thanks again for tuning in. I'm so glad you are here. Please continue to send me your questions and notes. This is your host, Monica Kang. You're listening to Curious Monica by InnovatorsBox. And I look forward to seeing you next week with another story to inspire you and rethink. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode at Curious Monica. I'm your host and executive director of the show, Monica Kang, founder and CEO of InnovatorsBox. And a little love shout out to our team who made this show possible for you today. From InnovatorsBox Studios, audio engineering and producing,
Sam Waymerd.
Audio engineering assistants,
Ravi Ladd.
Website and marketing support,
Cree Panday.
Graphic support,
Leah Orsini.
Christine Eribal.
Original music by InnovatorsBox Studios, and executive producing, writing and editing, and interviewing and all that jazz by me, Monica Kang. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please send us a note for any feedback and suggestions and questions that you have at info@innovatorsbox.com. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.